On a sunlit windowsill in a quiet cafe, where the air hums with the low thrum of espresso machines and the scent of cardamom, a chipped porcelain teacup sits untouched. It's the one the barista never washes, not out of neglect, but reverence. Its handle is cracked like a spider's web, and its rim bears a faint coffee stain shaped like a crescent moon. Outside, rain traces slow paths down the glass, turning the streetlights into liquid gold, while inside, the cup holds a pocket of stillness. Long after the morning's last pot of Earl Grey has run dry, steam rises from it, not from heat, but like the vapor of words never spoken, curling into shapes only the heart can name. Years ago, two friends met here every Tuesday at 3 p.m. sharp. They'd claim the corner table, its wood scarred by decades of whispered secrets. She carried grief she couldn't name, a quiet, nameless ache left by a childhood she'd never unpack. He held love he couldn't voice, a tender, unvoiced thing growing like ivy in the dark. They rarely spoke of what mattered most. Instead, they filled this cup with Earl Grey and silence. She'd pour the tea with hands that trembled just slightly. He'd stir in 2 sugars, watching the spoon spin like a compass needle seeking true north. Rain would streak the window as they sat, watching streetlights bloom in the puddles below, the sugar dissolving into the quiet between them like a secret neither could keep. She'd grown up in foster homes where love was conditional as weather, where she learned to fold her pain into origami birds and tuck them into drawers. He'd lost his brother to a car crash the year they met, and since then, he'd learned that love could vanish between heartbeats. He'd watch her sketch storm clouds in her notebook, the pencil flying across the page, and think, I want to be the calm after this. But he'd stay silent, polishing his tuning forks instead, the silver tools catching the light like unshed tears. One Tuesday in late autumn, she didn't come alone. She carried a small suitcase, its wheels clicking unevenly on the cafe's wooden floor. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry, and he felt the shift before she even spoke, a sudden coldness in the steam rising from the cup. I'm leaving, she said softly, placing a train ticket beside her untouched tea.
Portland.
My sister's there. It's time. He wanted to say, stay. Let me learn the shape of your grief. Let me show you how my love has roots. But the words turned to ash on his tongue. He nodded, stirring his tea until the spoon blurred into a silver streak. She pushed the cup toward him. It still steamed faintly, though the pot was long gone, and whispered, Keep this, for when you miss me. She left without looking back. He sat for an hour after she was gone, tracing the chip on the cup's handle with his thumb, feeling the ghost of her presence in the empty chair. When he finally stood, he placed it gently on the sunlit windowsill and walked away, leaving behind more than a teacup. He left a vessel for everything unsaid. The baristas noticed. First Ben, who'd worked the counter for 20 years, found the cup still warm at closing time and chose not to wash it. Then Rosa, the owner, saw steam rising from it on a Tuesday morning, her Tuesday, and understood. She hung a small, handwritten sign above the table. Reserved. Please do not touch. From then on, the cup became part of the cafe's quiet lore. The cup learned to hold more than tea. It holds the I'm sorry she swallowed when his son was born too soon, silent and still in the hospital's blue light. She'd stood outside the nursery window, watching him rock an empty blanket, and her grief for her own lost innocence fused with his sorrow. She wrote a letter that night. I know what it is to hold nothing when you expected everything, but burned it at dawn. The words flew up the chimney as ash, yet the cup on the windowsill grew warm, its porcelain absorbing the apology she never voiced. It holds the stay he choked back at the train station years later when she returned for a weekend visit. He'd driven her to the platform, rain slicking the asphalt, her suitcase strapped to his old Volvo's roof. As she hugged him goodbye, he felt the ghost of her tears on his shoulder, and his heart screamed, "Say it. Say stay and mean it." But he only patted her back, murmuring, "Safe travels." That night, the cup steamed fiercely, its vapor forming the shape of a train ticket dissolving into rain. It holds the weight of 1,000 Tuesdays where they almost reached across the table. The time her hand brushed his as she passed the sugar, both freezing, breath catching like tangled thread. The Tuesday he brought sheet music for a lullaby he'd composed, for the storms in your eyes, but tucked it away when she mentioned a new gallery showing. The cup remembers the space between their chairs widening and narrowing like tides, the unspoken love and grief swirling together until they became one current too deep to navigate. Now, when a lonely soul sits at that corner table, a man staring at divorce papers, a woman clutching a sonogram photo, the cup warms their hands. Steam curls into shapes only they can see, a child's laughter made of light, a train ticket fluttering like a sparrow's wing. And in the steam's whisper, softer than rain on glass, they hear, "It's okay to miss them. It's okay to wait." No one drinks from it. They simply hold it until their own unsaid words dissolve into its warmth. "I forgive you. I'm not ready. I still love you," melting like sugar in tea, and for a moment, the silence isn't empty. It's full of forgiveness, as if the cup itself remembers how to hold what we cannot say. The cafe breathes with the cup's rhythm. On Tuesdays, the corner table stays empty until dusk, as if holding its breath. Rosa leaves a small dish of sugar cubes beside the cup. For the words that need sweetening, she tells newcomers with a gentle smile. Ben wipes the table around it, careful not to disturb the steam that curls like a living thing above the porcelain. Patrons learn to pause when they pass the corner. A man in a rumpled suit sits there after signing divorce papers. The cup's warmth seeps into his palms as steam shapes his daughter's graduation photo in the air. A young woman with tear-streaked mascara holds it after a fight with her mother. Vapor forms the scent of her childhood kitchen, cinnamon rolls baking on Sunday mornings. Neither speaks. They just breathe with the cup until the weight in their chests softens enough to carry home. One rainy afternoon, a teenager with ink-stained fingers slipped into the corner seat. He'd just failed his art portfolio review. The rejection letter crumpled in his pocket, and hadn't told his parents how much it meant to him. As his fingers closed around the cup, steam rose immediately, curling into the shape of a paintbrush dipped in gold. In the quiet, he didn't hear words, but he felt a presence, warm and certain, whispering, "Your colors are not wrong. They are yours." He sketched on a napkin until the cafe closed, the cup warming his hands like a promise kept. When he left, he tucked the napkin under the sugar dish, a lopsided son wearing sunglasses, grinning through the rain. The cup remembers all who pause. It holds the "I'm proud of you" a father swallowed when his daughter came out, his throat too tight to speak. It holds the "I forgive you" a sister never said after a slammed door echoed through their childhood home. It holds the weight of 1,000 almost moments where love trembled on the tongue but never found its voice, suspended in steam like unshed tears. Last winter, he returned, the man with the tuning forks. His hair was silvered at the temples. His hands, once steady, now bore the tremor of age. He'd come back to the city for his mother's funeral, drawn by memory more than duty. The cafe was quieter now. The paint on the walls faded, but the corner table remained untouched, and on the windowsill, the cup, still chipped, still steaming. He sat slowly, as if his bones remembered the weight of all those unsaid years. He didn't touch the cup at first. He just watched the steam rise, shaping itself into a tiny crown for the mouse sketch she'd drawn on a napkin. A half-moon, her birthmark, a single piano key. When he finally wrapped his hands around it, warmth flooded him. Not just heat, but the feeling of her hand in his, the scent of her lavender soap, the sound of her laugh when he'd tripped over his own feet outside this berry.
Café.
I loved you, he whispered, the words raw and trembling. I was just afraid to lose you, too. The cup steamed fiercely in response. Vapor formed a train ticket, Portland to here, then dissolved into a sketch of 2 chairs pulled close together. Her presence wasn't in the steam, but in his chest, clear as a struck bell. You never lost me. I was always in the silence between your notes. He wept then, quietly, the tears falling onto the table like summer rain. When he left, he placed his old tuning fork beside the cup, a silver note held in stillness, waiting to be heard. The next spring, she came back. She saw the tuning fork gleaming on the sill, the steam rising like a beacon calling her home. She sat, trembling, and the porcelain warmed instantly beneath her palms, as if it had been waiting for her breath all along. I'm sorry I left the silence, she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. The steam shifted. The tuning fork glowed in the mist, vibrating softly with a sound only the heart could hear. His voice came warm as tea. The silence was never empty. It was full of us. She closed her eyes, and memories flooded her. The rain-streaked window, the sugar dissolving, the way his hands looked steady even when his voice wasn't. The cup held it all. The grief she'd carried, the love she'd been too afraid to accept, the years she'd spent painting storms while longing for calm. When she opened her eyes, the cup was cool. The steam had settled into stillness, but on the table lay 2 things, his tuning fork and a fresh sketch, 2 chairs at a sunlit table, an empty cup between them, steam rising like a bridge made of breath and memory. No one drinks from it. They simply hold it until their own unsaid words dissolve into its warmth, becoming part of its quiet history. And for a moment, the silence isn't empty. It's full of forgiveness, as if love itself has learned to linger in porcelain and vapor. The cup has no name on any menu, and no plaque marks its history, but the regulars know. On Tuesdays, the corner table is always reserved, not with a sign, but with steam that rises like a vow. Baristas leave extra sugar cubes, and patrons leave tokens, a seashell, a pressed flower, a smooth stone worn by river currents. Rosa sweeps them gently into a wooden box beneath the counter. The cup's garden, she calls it. Each token hums with the weight of a healed silence, a word finally released into the air. For longing, when it is born of courage, does not fade. It becomes steam. It becomes warmth. It becomes the vapor that holds the shape of what we almost said, what we still carry, what we hope to give. And so the cup sits, not for tea, but for tenderness, not for thirst, but for truth, not for endings, but for the space between heartbeats where love waits to be named. Because everyone, at some point, needs to know, your silence is not a void. It is a vessel. On the stillest of days, when the words stick like dust in your throat and the world demands you speak before you're ready, the cup opens its steam, just enough to whisper. It's okay to miss them. It's okay to wait. In a third-floor apartment overlooking a park where willow trees dip their branches into still ponds, a fogged window never fully clears. Even in the thick heat of July, frost lingers on its glass, not from drafts or faulty insulation, but from the breath of someone who stood there every dawn for 30 years. The apartment belongs to no one now. Its door is locked, and its keys are held by a weary property manager who sighs when tenants complain about this strange cold spot in the hall. But the window remembers. She was a painter. Her canvases lived in galleries, but her heart lived in this ordinary room. Each morning at 5:47 a.m., just as the city stirred awake, she'd press her palm against the pane, watching children chase pigeons below. Her fingers left ghosts on the glass, smudges shaped like wings where she'd trace sparrows in flight, like outstretched hands reaching for the oak tree's branches, like the soft curve of a child's cheek. The face of a daughter she lost too young to meningitis at age 6. She never spoke of her daughter after the funeral, but the window held her grief like a frozen tear. She'd sketched the park's rhythms in a leather-bound journal. 3 boys feeding ducks, one with a lopsided grin. Mrs. Chin walking her arthritic terrier, slow as sunrise. The empty swing swaying alone after rain. Her pencil moving while her breath painted the glass with memories only she could see. When she passed quietly in her sleep at 82, the building manager cleared the apartment of furniture and frames, donating her paints to a community center. But the window remained untouched. At dawn, frost blooms into her silhouette. A woman in a faded blue robe, waiting. Neighbors think it's a draft, and the super tapes weather stripping every winter, but the frost always returns. But the little girl who lives across the hall knows better. Her name is Lena, 7 years old, with eyes too old for her face and a sketchbook always tucked under her arm. She moved here after her father left, her mother working double shifts at the hospital. Lena feels invisible sometimes, in school hallways, in grocery store lines, even in her own small bed at night. One bleary January dawn, she'd crept into the hallway for water and seen it. A woman's shape in the frost, one hand raised as if waving. Lena hadn't run in fear. She'd pressed her own small palm against the icy glass and felt warmth bloom beneath her fingers, as if the cold had been holding its breath just for her. Now, every morning, Lena brings her sketchbook to the window. The frost mother leans close, her breath frosting the page. Lena's pencil moves almost on its own, sketching a kite tangled in the park's oldest maple, a 3-legged terrier named Buster, Mrs. Chen's dog, who limps but never stops chasing squirrels, a bridge made of rainbows arcing over the duck pond. The frost mother's icy breath guides the lines. turning Lena's shaky circles into perfect spirals, her hesitant strokes into confident curves. When Lena draws the daughter, a little girl with a painter's smile, holding a dandelion gone to seed, the frost thickens on the glass, glowing faintly blue in the dawn light. One Tuesday, Lena's grandmother, Nana Ida, found her there, shivering in pajamas but smiling at a drawing of two women holding hands beneath a willow tree. "You see her too?" Lena whispered, not looking up. Nana Ida wrapped her shawl around Lena's shoulders without a word. She'd seen this before, in her village in Oaxaca, where the old women spoke of Los Susurros del Viento, the wind's whispers, that carried ancestors' hands. "Some absences are doors," she murmured, her voice like dry leaves, not walls. She placed a thermos of hot chocolate on the windowsill and added softly, "This one opens at dawn." The window's magic isn't limited to Lena. A retired postman stops each morning with his cane. He lost his wife to Alzheimer's last year. The disease stole her memories first, then her smile, then her voice. Now, he brings faded photos to the window. A beach vacation in '89, his wife laughing as a wave soaked her sundress. Their wedding day, her bouquet spilling white roses onto the sidewalk. He holds them against the frost, and steam rises from the images. For a breath, her laughter echoes in the hall, not as a ghost, but as a feeling, warm as sunlight on skin. "Remember how the seagulls stole your sandwich?" He'll whisper. The frost thickens over the photo's sea, forming tiny wing shapes that shimmer in the morning light. When he leaves, his shoulders are straighter, and the frost melts slower that day, holding the echo of joy a little longer. A nurse working night shifts visits at 6 a.m. on her way home. She wears her exhaustion like a second uniform, her hands still smelling of antiseptic. She leans her forehead against the cold glass and breathes out the names of patients she couldn't save. Mr. Chun, room 412. Baby Lena, 3 weeks old. Sergeant Riley, who asked for his dog one last time. The frost absorbs her tears, turning them into delicate fern patterns that spread like lace across the pane. Then, warmth spreads through the glass from within. A child's voice, clear as a bell, whispers, "You held my hand when I was scared. That mattered." She closes her eyes, and the weight in her chest softens, just enough to carry home. The building super was the one who first noticed the frost's rhythm. He's a gruff man with grease-stained hands and a tattoo of a sparrow on his wrist, a memorial for his brother, gone too young. He doesn't speak to the window, but every Friday, he leaves a single sunflower on the sill, the painter's favorite. The frost always melts around it, forming a perfect circle of clear glass where the flower drinks the dawn light. One bitter December morning, he sat slumped against the wall after a tenant yelled at him for a leaky faucet. The frost mother's silhouette leaned down, her breath frosting the floorboards near his boots. A shape formed in the ice, 2 sparrows sharing a seed. His rough hands covered his face, and his shoulders shook silently. When he looked up, the frost had shaped a tiny toolbox beside the sparrows, tools gleaming in the pale light. He fixed the faucet that afternoon, and left another sunflower on the sill. The frost never melts until noon, long enough for the lonely to remember they, too, leave traces on the world. Long enough for grief to be witnessed, for love to be returned, for silence to become a kind of language, and in that quiet space between night and day, the window holds them all, seen, known, and gently held. Lena's drawings began appearing in the park. First, chalk rainbows bloomed on the pavement. exact replicas of the ones the Frost Mother had sketched in Lena's notebook. Then, tiny clay sparrows appeared tucked into tree hollows, their wings delicate and slightly lopsided, just like the painter's sketches. Mrs. Chen found a drawing of Buster tucked under her doormat, a perfect likeness, right down to his crooked left ear. "Who made this, Mija?" she asked Lena at the mailboxes. Lena just shrugged, eyes downcast. But Nana Ida saw the truth in the way Frost sometimes clung to Lena's sketchbook overnight. She started leaving it open on their kitchen table at dawn. Sometimes, by morning, frost had bloomed across the pages, delicate tracings of the Frost Mother's hand over Lena's drawings, turning a scribbled cat into a creature with wings, a lopsided house into a castle with a door shaped like a heart. One October morning, Lena drew the daughter not as a memory, but as a girl her own age, chasing butterflies in the park, her hair tangled with dandelion fluff. As she finished the last line, the Frost Mother's hand pressed against the glass from the other side. Lena gasped, her breath fogging the pane. For the first time, the frost didn't just guide her pencil. It pulled her palm flat against the window. Cold burned her skin for a heartbeat. Then warmth flooded up her arm like honey. In her mind, a voice like wind chimes whispered, "She loved you before she knew you." "I do too." Lena ran to Nana Ida, breathless and wide-eyed. "She's real. She touched me." Nana Ida poured 2 cups of atoll, the cinnamon steam curling like the window's breath. "Grief isn't a hole, corazon," she said gently. "It's a thread. Sometimes it pulls us down. Sometimes it lifts us up. Today, it lifted you." She placed Lena's hand over her own heart. "Feel that? Your heartbeat is your song." Hers lives in the silence between the notes. Winter deepened. Snow blanketed the park, turning the duck pond to glass, and the frost window became a living canvas of memories. On the coldest night of the year, -12 degrees Fahrenheit, the glass frosted over completely, a seamless sheet of white lace glowing with inner light. City lights below blurred into constellations as Lena and Nana Ida sat cross-legged on the hall rug, wrapped in blankets. They watched the Frost Mother trace shapes in the ice, the daughter building a snowman, the painter at her easel, a tiny door opening in the frost where starlight poured through. The silhouette hummed, a low, resonant vibration that shook the floorboards. Lena's sketchbook levitated gently, pages flipping until it landed on a blank sheet. Frost formed words in elegant script. For the ones who feel unseen. You are witnessed. Your laughter in empty rooms echoes in heaven. Your tears water gardens I tend. Your breath on cold glass is a prayer I answer. Nana Ida wept silently. She's singing a lullaby for all of us, she whispered. Below, a young man paused beneath the window. He'd just been fired, his apartment lease expiring, his phone buzzing with bills he couldn't pay. He'd walked for hours through the snow, ready to disappear into the white silence. The frost light caught his face, a soft, silver beam cutting through the dark. He felt it then. A hand on his shoulder, light as snowfall, not cold, warm, steady, a whisper in the space behind his ribs. This is not your ending. Look up. He tilted his head. Through the frost lace, he saw stars unblurred by city lights, sharp and bright as hope. For the first time in months, he breathed deeply. He bought a bus ticket at dawn. A year later, he'd send a postcard to the building manager. Became a park ranger in Montana. Thank you for the stars. Spring came late that year. When the first crocus pushed through the snow, Lena brought her sketchbook to the window one final time. Her mother had found a new job, a new home across town, and today was their last morning in the building. She drew a door, not closed, but an open archway framed by willow branches, sunlight streaming through like liquid gold. The Frost Mother's silhouette stood on the threshold. Her hand reached through the glass, not as ice, but as warmth. Lena pressed her palm against it. "I have to go," she whispered, "but I'll visit. I promise." The frost glowed softly, and the daughter's face appeared beside the Frost Mother's, a girl with Lena's eyes, holding a dandelion clock. 3 wishes floated on its seeds, for courage, for laughter, for roots that hold you when the wind blows. Frost-shaped words on the glass. You carry me in your hands. Every drawing you make, every kindness you give, that is my breath in your lungs. Go, be seen. Lena left the sketchbook on the sill. The frost sealed its pages shut with ice, preserving the drawing of the open door like a promise. The apartment stayed empty, but the window's ritual continued. On Lena's birthday each year, a single sunflower bloomed in a crack of the sidewalk below the frost window. Impossible in January, vibrant even in snow. Nana Ida always placed a cup of hot chocolate on the sill that morning, and the steam rose, swirling with the frost like old friends dancing. The retired postman still visits with photos, but now he brings them for Lena too. Pictures of her winning the school art contest, of Nana Ida's garden bursting with marigolds. The frost frames them in delicate ice frames that shimmer until noon. The nurse leaves origami cranes on the sill after tough shifts. By dawn, they're filled with frost stars that catch the first light. Even the super brings sunflowers weekly. One summer morning, he found the frost shaped like a key resting on his toolbox, a key to a storage unit where he'd kept his brother's old guitar. He started playing again, the notes drifting up to the 3rd floor window like answered prayers. People say time heals all wounds, but perhaps that's not quite right. Time doesn't heal. It witnesses. It cradles our grief like a newborn. It holds our joy like a sunrise. It holds our unfinished conversations in its frozen breath, waiting for us to be ready to carry them again. This window knows that better than anyone. It does not rush. It does not forget. It simply holds the space where absences become doors. And if you ever walk past the park at dawn and see frost blooming on a 3rd floor window, don't look away. Stop. Breathe. Press your palm against the cold glass. You might just feel a hand press back, warm as sunrise, whispering, "You are witnessed," even when you feel unseen. For longing, when it is born of witness, does not fade. It becomes frost. It becomes breath. It becomes the cold glass that holds the warmth of 1,000 unseen hands. And so the window waits, not for visitors, but for vision, not for tears, but for tenderness, not for endings, but for the door between worlds to open just enough, because everyone, at some point, needs to know your absence leaves a shape that love still fills. On the stillest of mornings, when loneliness feels like a locked room and the world moves too fast to see you, the frost opens its breath, just enough to whisper, "I see you. I remember you. You are not alone." By the front door of a tiny bookstore tucked between a baker's oven and a laundromat's hum, an old oak coat rack stands empty, except for the weight of coats that no longer hang there. Its wood is darkened by decades of hands, its four brass hooks bowed like weary arms under invisible burdens. No one sees the wool scarf left behind by a student who moved to Kyoto to teach calligraphy. No one touches the raincoat abandoned by a lover who sailed away on a cargo ship named Wanderlust. No one breathes in the scent of playground grass still clinging to a child's patched jacket, hanging perpetually at the perfect height for small shoulders. But the shopkeeper knows. He feels their weight in the creak of the wood, in the way the rack leans slightly toward the door at dawn, as if straining to see who might return. Its grain holds stories, knots in the oak map where hooks have sagged under sorrow, a depression shaped like a child's shoulder, a groove worn smooth by a mother's trembling hand. Dust motes dance in the slanted light above it, turning the air golden at 3 p.m. when shadows stretch longest across the floorboards. The rack breathes with the shop, inhaling the scent of aging paper and leather bindings when customers enter, exhaling warmth when the door closes behind them. On still afternoons, when the only sound is the tick of the shop's antique clock, the rack creaks softly, hooks sway without wind, and books on the nearest shelf tremble as if breathing. If you stand near it, truly still, heart open, you feel a tug at your sleeve, gentle as a spider's thread. A whisper weaves through the wood grain. Wait. The shopkeeper never removes the invisible coats. They'll come back for them, he tells customers, his voice like pages turning in an old novel, but his eyes linger longest on the second hook from the left, the one holding the ghost of a crimson wool scarf patterned with silver stars. His granddaughter wore it the day she left for university in Edinburgh. She twirled in the doorway, the scarf flying like a banner, promising, "I'll wear it to graduation, Grandpa. Save me a front row seat." She didn't return. A bus accident on the A9 highway silenced her laughter at 21. The scarf vanished from his hall closet the next morning and reappeared on the rack's hook at dawn. The rack holds more than fabric. It holds the almost, the moments suspended between choice and departure. It holds the coat she almost took when the bus arrived, then shrugged off with a laugh. "Too warm for Scotland, Grandpa." It holds the jacket he almost grabbed before his wife walked out after their final argument. "I'll be back by supper," she'd said, not knowing the rain would wash her tire into a ravine. It holds a scarf she almost wound tighter against the wind that carried her away. It holds the weight of 1,000 almost goodbyes. The student who almost mailed her thesis draft before boarding the plane. The sailor who almost kissed his lover's palm before climbing the gangplank. The child who almost waved from the school bus window. On quiet afternoons, the rack creaks softly, hooks sway without wind, and the air thickens with memory. The shopkeeper places a fresh mug of tea on the counter each morning. Steam curls toward the empty space where a customer might pause. For when you pause, he murmurs to the silence. He knows the tea cools untouched, but the steam rises anyway, carrying the scent of chamomile and old paper, the warmth of promises kept in memory. The rack drinks it in, and the hooks sigh, as if remembering. The shop breathes with its own rhythm. Dust motes dance above the rack like captive stars. When snow falls thick against the windows, frost patterns bloom on the brass hooks, delicate ferns shaped like musical staves. In summer heat, the wood sweats beads of moisture that smell of cedar and distant oceans. Patrons sense its pull, A woman in a rumpled suit lingers by the door after signing divorce papers. The rack's third hook trembles, and for a breath, she feels the ghost of her daughter's small hand in hers. A college student shivers after his father's final words. "You're on your own now," echo in his ears. He hangs his thin jacket on the rack, and warmth spreads up his arms as if wrapped in an invisible embrace. Neither sees the coats. They only feel the weight lifting. The shopkeeper polishes the brass hooks each evening with a soft cloth. He whispers names like prayers. Alara, Maggie, Leo. The wood drinks his tears. The hooks bow lower, as if carrying the weight of all the love that refuses to disappear. He leaves offerings too. A pressed forget-me-not on the base, a smooth sea glass shard on the top hook. The rack absorbs them all. Frost patterns bloom on its wood even in July heat. Warmth radiates from its base on the bitterest nights. Children sense it first. They hug the rack on their way to story hour, giggling as invisible scarves tickle their necks. One shy girl draws pictures of the rack wearing hats, a sun hat for summer, a wool cap for winter. The shopkeeper pins them to the bulletin board beside Ben's framed illustration. The next morning, Frost shapes a tiny hat on the top hook, delicate as spun sugar. Neighbors respect its quiet power. The baker next door ties day-old sourdough with twine and hangs it on the lowest hook, a ritual begun when his son left for medical school. The loaf vanishes by noon, replaced by the faint scent of antiseptic and the ghost of his laugh. The laundromat owner leaves folded towels scented with lavender beneath the rack's base. For the journey back, she tells the shopkeeper, one January night, as snow fell thick outside, the rack shuddered deeply. Her late husband had loved blizzards. Steam rose from the towels, forming the shape of his silhouette, tall, familiar, hat tilted just so. She didn't speak. She simply reached up, her hand passing through the steam, and felt the ghost of his knuckles brush her palm. When the steam cleared, a single snowflake-shaped button lay on the towel. She keeps it in her pocket, always. Last winter, a traveler entered shivering. She stumbled through the shop's bell-jangled door at 3 p.m. on the coldest Tuesday of January. Her boots were crusted with road salt, her gloves stiff with ice from the long hitchhike from Portland after her car died near the Oregon border. She'd been running from a breakup that left her voice raw from shouting, her spirit frayed at the edges. She warmed her hands over the radiator, steam rising from her gloves like surrender. The rack's lowest hook trembled almost imperceptibly. The shopkeeper watched from behind the counter, mending a torn copy of And of Green Gables, his fingers pausing as he saw it happen slowly. Her thin coat slipped from her shoulders as if guided by unseen hands. Then, delicately, tenderly, the invisible crimson wool scarf draped itself over her, not as a ghost, but as real, present warmth. She gasped, her fingers closing around the silver star pattern woven into the wool. Color flooded her cheeks, and she turned to the shopkeeper, tears streaking through the dust on her face. Not tears of sorrow, but of startled recognition. "It smells like my grandmother's attic," she whispered, "like cedar and peppermint." The shopkeeper's breath caught in his throat. His granddaughter had said the exact same words the day she left. He shuffled forward slowly and placed a fresh mug of tea beside her, chamomile steeped with apple blossoms. As she wrapped her hands around the warmth, he saw it clearly. Not a ghost, but a reflection, his granddaughter's smile blooming in the traveler's eyes. Not identical, but alive. A bridge built of shared comfort. She loved storms, the shopkeeper said softly, nodding toward the snow now swirling beyond the window. Said they washed the world clean. The traveler nodded, tracing the scarf's fringe with her thumb. Mine too. She taught me to knit in thunderstorms. She stayed until the shop closed, sipping tea and sharing stories of a grandmother who collected teacups and believed crows carried messages between worlds. When she finally stood to leave, the shopkeeper expected the scarf to return to its hook. It didn't. She wore it out into the snow, the crimson wool bright against the white street like a promise kept. The shopkeeper didn't call after her. He simply placed 2 mugs of tea on the counter the next morning. One for her, one for the space beside her. The rack changed after that. Its hooks stood straighter, as if relieved of a burden. The wood's creak softened into a low, steady hum. The baker's sourdough loaves began vanishing faster, replaced by the scent of faraway places. Kyoto cherry blossoms, Edinburgh rain, Oregon pine forests, lingering in the air like whispered postcards. The college student found his sketchbook rearranged each dawn, new details added in looping script that matched his granddaughter's handwriting. The sparrow's nest has 3 eggs. The boy shares his mittens. He started leaving pencils beside the rack before closing. They returned each morning sharpened, erasers fresh, as if someone had been waiting to help him draw hope. One April morning, a man entered the shop. He'd been a sailor who chose the sea over quiet love. He was older now, his hands scarred by rope burns, his eyes holding the Pacific's depth. He placed a small seashell on the counter and rasped, "For Maggie, I should have stayed." The rack shuddered deeply, as if exhaling after decades of silence. Maggie's raincoat, once invisible, materialized on the 3rd hook, dripping phantom ocean spray that vanished before it hit the floor. He reached out slowly, tears cutting paths through his stubble. The coat didn't vanish when he touched it. It shifted, flowing over his shoulders like warm harbor water at dawn. In that moment, he didn't feel forgiveness. He felt release. The weight of 30 years dissolved like salt in warm water. He left the shell on the counter. The next day, it sat beside the shopkeeper's tea mug, filled with rainwater holding a perfect reflection of the shop's sign, the dusty quill. The laundromat owner brought her husband's favorite blue towel one evening, folding it gently beneath the rack. It vanished by noon. That evening, she found it neatly folded on her doorstep, damp with dew and smelling unmistakably of his pipe tobacco. She wrapped it around her shoulders and sat on her porch until dawn, watching stars blink awake like old friends returning. The shopkeeper began leaving offerings too, a pressed forget-me-not from his granddaughter's graduation bouquet, his wife's favorite teacup, chipped but still whole, the smooth sea glass shard the sailor had left behind on his way out. The rack absorbed them all without sound or spectacle. Frost patterns bloomed on its wood even in summer heat. Warmth radiated from its base on the bitterest nights. Children sensed it first. They'd hug the rack on their way to story hour, giggling as invisible scarves tickled their necks. One shy girl drew pictures of the rack wearing hats, a sun hat for summer, a wool cap for winter, and gave them to the shopkeeper. He pinned them to the bulletin board beside the student's framed illustration. The next morning, Frost had shaped a tiny hat on the top hook, delicate as spun sugar. No one claimed it. Everyone knew. People say time heals all wounds, but perhaps that's not quite right. Time doesn't heal. It holds. It cradles our grief like a coat folded with care. It holds our joy like pockets full of seashells. It holds our unfinished goodbyes in the grain of wood, waiting for us to be ready to wear them again. This rack knows that better than anyone. It does not rush. It does not forget. It simply holds the space where absences become warm. And if you ever step into the tiny bookstore on a quiet afternoon and feel a tug at your sleeve near the old oak rack, don't pull away. Stand still. Breathe. Let the invisible scarf brush your cheek like a memory you didn't know you missed. You might just feel a hand on your shoulder, light as falling snow, whispering. You are not alone in your leaving. You are not alone in your staying. For longing, when it is born of waiting, does not fade. It becomes wood. It becomes warmth. It becomes the hook that bends to hold what love left behind. And so the rack stands, not for coats, but for connection, not for endings, but for entrances, not for goodbyes, but for the breath between heartbeats where reunion waits, because everyone, at some point, needs to know what you carried is still carried for you. On the stillest of days, when departure feels like abandonment and the road ahead seems endless, the rack opens its hooks, just enough to whisper, I hold you. I have always held you. Rest here a while. In a dusty community hall where sunlight slants through high windows like liquid gold, a forgotten upright piano sits under a threadbare sheet the color of old snow. Its wood is scarred with scratches from decades of children's chairs, its keys yellowed like forgotten letters, its strings rusted from river valley damp. Dust motes dance above it even on still days, swirling as if stirred by invisible breath. The air smells of aged paper, lemon oil, and the faint metallic tang of neglected strings. When no one's watching, when the last folding chair is stacked, when the janitor's mop bucket echoes down the hall, the piano plays itself, not full songs, but fragments, a child's laugh in middle C, bright, sudden, dissolving like sugar in tea, a grandmother's lullaby in the low notes, warm as worn flannel, humming through floorboards, the hesitant melody a groom hummed before walking down the aisle, fragile as a spiderweb at dawn. These fragments drift like dandelion seeds on the still air. They don't fill the hall, they inhabit it. A single note hangs where a tear might fall. A half chord blooms in the space between breaths. Sometimes, in winter, frost patterns spread across the piano's lid. Delicate ice crystals shaped like musical staves. In summer heat, the wood sweats beads of moisture that smell of cedar and old memories. The sheet trembles without wind. Shadows pool beneath the bench like spilled ink, deepening when footsteps approach the door. The piano belonged to Mr. Ellis, who taught music here for 40 years, his hands mapping joy onto ivory keys. His classroom was this very hall, folding chairs arranged in imperfect circles, a chalkboard stained with eraser dust, a thermos of Earl Grey steaming on the windowsill. He never scolded missed notes. A wrong note is just a breath waiting to become right, he'd say, his voice rough as unplanned wood. He taught war veterans to play with prosthetic fingers and stayed late with foster children who carried silences heavier than sheet music. His hands were maps of time, knotted veins like rivers, calloused fingertips tracing constellations on ivory. when arthritis stole his strength at 78. He pressed his palms flat against the keys one last time, silent. Farewell, a transfer of warmth from flesh to wood. The piano kept his touch. Now, it plays only for those who've lost their song. A teenager with headphones slung low sits on the bench after school. She's 16, her backpack heavy with textbooks and unspoken grief. She hasn't sung since her mother's funeral 3 months ago. Not in the shower, not in the car, not even the off-key pop songs she used to belt while doing dishes. Today, she's here because the empty house felt too loud. She traces a finger along the piano's dusty lid, remembering how her mother would hum while kneading bread dough, the rhythm of her voice syncing with a thump of flour on wood. The girl's throat tightens. She lifts the sheet. The keys gleam faintly in the afternoon light. She rests her hands on them, just resting, not pressing. The piano exhales. A single note rises. G above middle C, her mother's favorite note, the one she'd hit when laughing at her daughter's terrible impressions. Then another, E flat, warm as honey on toast, the opening of Morning Has Broken, the hymn her mother sang every Sunday while making pancakes. Dust motes dance in the sunbeam as the notes swell, not from the girl's fingers, but from the piano's own breath. Tears fall onto the keys, each drop sparking a new harmony, a counter melody only heartache knows. The hall fills with sound that feels like a hand on her back, guiding her breath. Inhale, exhale, you are not alone. It's okay to be quiet, the piano seems to say. I'll hold the music until you're ready. The girl doesn't wipe her tears. She lets them fall, each one a tiny baptism on the yellowed ivory. When the last note fades, the sheet drifts back down like a sigh. She leaves without looking back, but her shoulders are lighter. On the bench, 2 wet spots glow like dew on stone. No one claims the piano. The town calls it haunted. Pastor Evans tried to have it removed after Sunday service one winter. Demons sing through broken things, he declared, clutching his Bible. But as the movers gripped the piano's legs, the keys erupted in a furious cascade. Vox toccata and fugue twisted into a storm of dissonance. Light bulbs shattered. The movers fled in terror. Pastor Evans found his sermon notes shredded on the floor, replaced by sheet music for Amazing Grace in his late wife's handwriting. He never mentioned the piano again, though he sometimes pauses outside the hall on quiet evenings listening. Children avoid the hall after dusk. They sprint past its windows, backpacks bouncing, giggles cutting off abruptly as they pass the door. Adults cross the street when its lights glow with moonlight. Even the janitor empties trash bins quickly, whistling loudly to fill the silence. Only the night watchman lingers. He's an old man with a tremor in his left hand and a harmonica in his pocket. He patrols the hall at 2 a.m., sweeping dust bunnies from under chairs, checking windows. He never turns on the lights, just sits on the 3rd row folding chair, pulls out his harmonica and plays Moon River. Off-key, breathy. The piano answers, not loudly, but with a few deep chords in the bass register, like a heartbeat beneath his tune. Sometimes, when he plays a shaky high note, the piano swells beneath it, holding the pitch steady. On bitter nights, steam rises from the keys where his breath mingles with the piano's. He leaves a thermos of cocoa on the bench each shift. By dawn, it's half empty, the cup still warm. You keep time for me, he murmurs one January night, snow falling thick beyond the windows. I keep it for you. The piano sighs, a single note, middle C. hangs in the air like a held breath. He smiles. He knows. Objects don't forget. They remember for us, so we can breathe while we learn to remember again. The piano's fragments grow bolder with the watchman's presence. Frost patterns bloom on its wood even in July heat. Delicate ferns shaped like musical staves. The rust on the strings gleams like new silver after rain, as if the instrument is remembering how to shine. One night, as he plays his harmonica, the piano doesn't just accompany him, it sings. A clear, pure melody weaves through his off-key notes, a lullaby his daughter used to hum before the accident. His hands stilled in shock. The harmonica slipped from his fingers and clattered softly on the floor. He wept openly, the sound raw and unguarded, years of grief finally breaking free. The piano held the space for his tears, the melody softening to a whisper against his sobs. When he finally stood to leave, the harmonica lay on the bench, polished to a shine as if touched by loving hands. The next evening, a folded note rested beside it. For the duet, E. He knew immediately. He'd seen Mr. Ellis's initials carved into the piano's leg as a boy. He placed the note in his pocket, next to his daughter's baby tooth, and walked home with his head a little higher. Others feel the piano's pull. A veteran with a prosthetic hand sits on the bench after Tuesday VFW meetings. He hasn't touched a piano since Saigon, his memories tangled with smoke and silence. His fingers hover over the keys, trembling with decades of restraint. The piano exhales a low, resonant hum that vibrates through his bones like a long-forgotten prayer. Steam rises from the keys, forming the shape of his childhood home. A porch swing swaying gently, a magnolia tree heavy with blossoms. He plays one note, then another, hesitant but true. The piano fills the gaps, weaving his shaky chords into what a wonderful world. By the final note, his shoulders are straight, his breath steady. On the bench, a single magnolia petal glows in the moonlight, cool and real beneath his fingertips. A child with a stutter hides in the hall after school, escaping bullies who mimic her halting words. She presses her small hands flat on the keys, not to play, but to hide. The piano breathes out a melody like wind chimes, gentle, patient, full of space. Her voice, usually trapped behind her teeth, finds the words. Twinkle, twinkle, little Este. The piano swells beneath her, holding the high notes she can't reach, giving her voice room to grow. She sings the whole verse, clear and bright, her fear dissolving in the music. When she leaves, her stutter is quieter, as if the piano has tucked it away for safekeeping. The sheet trembles slightly, as if bowing in respect to her courage. The town stops calling it haunted. Pastor Evans leaves a hymnal on the bench one Sunday, his fingers lingering on the cover. The next morning, it lies open to "It is well with my soul," the margins filled with his late wife's handwriting, notes about choir rehearsals, grocery lists, love letters disguised as reminders. He plays the piano at the spring festival that year, his first time in 20 years. The keys stay clear and bright beneath his trembling hands, as if welcoming him home. Children leave offerings, a smooth river stone on the bench, a crayon drawing of a piano with angel wings, a dandelion clock blowing wishes into the air. The watchman sweeps them gently into a wooden crate labeled duets, stacking each token with reverence. He knows these aren't just gifts. They're answered prayers. The teenager returns every Thursday. She never plays, just sits with her hands resting on the keys, letting the piano breathe her mother's songs into the silence. One April afternoon, she brings her mother's recipe book, Nana's Kitchen, spine cracked from use, pages stained with flour and love. She opens it to sourdough bread and reads aloud. Let the dough rest until it remembers how to rise. The piano answers with a low, resonant hum that vibrates through the floorboards. The sheet lifts slightly, as if stirred by memory. Dust motes swirl into the shape of hands kneading invisible dough. Her tears fall freely now, not just for grief, but for the warmth of her mother's kitchen. The scent of yeast, the thump of flour on wood, the way her mother's apron strings always came untied. When she leaves, the recipe book lies open on the bench, a single sunflower seed resting on the page. Her mother planted them every spring, calling them seeds of stubborn joy. One June evening, she brings her guitar. She sits cross-legged on the floor, strumming chords her mother taught her, simple, sweet, full of summer. The piano joins in, not matching her tune, but weaving around it like ivy on a fence, harmony blooming where melody ends. The watchman watches from the shadows, harmonica silent in his pocket. He understands now. This isn't about replacing lost voices. It's about making space for them to breathe, to echo, to live again in the spaces between notes. People say time heals all wounds, but perhaps that's not quite right. Time doesn't heal, it holds. It cradles our silence like sheet music waiting for hands. It holds our tears like dew on piano keys. It holds our unfinished songs in rusted strings, waiting for us to be ready to sing again. This piano knows that better than anyone. It does not rush. It does not forget. It simply holds the space where absence becomes music. And if you ever step into the hall on a quiet afternoon and feel the air hum with unsung notes, don't turn away. Sit on the bench. Rest your hands on the keys. You might just feel a warmth rise through your palms, gentle as a lullaby, whispering, "Your silence is not empty. It is full of songs waiting to be born." For longing, when it is born of music, does not fade. It becomes breath. It becomes strings. It becomes the space between notes where healing begins. And so the piano waits, not for players, but for listeners, not for perfection, but for courage, not for endings, but for the first trembling note after the deepest silence, because everyone, at some point, needs to know what you lost still lives in the world's breath. On the stillest of nights, when your voice feels locked in your throat and the memories are too heavy to carry alone, the piano opens its keys, just enough to whisper, "I remember for you. Breathe. Begin again." At the corner of Cedar and Rowan, where magnolia blossoms drift like pink snow each April, one street lamp flickers when no others do. Its light is warmer, softer, a butter-yellow glow that pools on the sidewalk like spilled honey, turning raindrops into liquid topaz. This is the lamp outside the cottage with peeling white paint, where Mrs. Callahan sat every night in her rocking chair for 20 years. She waited for footsteps that never came on the path. Her son joined the Navy at 18 and promised to be back by Christmas. The cottage breathes with absence. Its porch swings sighs in the wind. Its windows stay dark long after neighbors' lights fade. but the lamp never dims. Even when summer heat shimmers above the asphalt, frost patterns bloom on its iron post, delicate ice crystals shaped like handwriting. When fog rolls in from the river, the glow thickens, a visible warmth cutting through the gray. Dust motes dance in its beam like captive stars. Passers-by feel it in their skin, a subtle lift in the chest, a loosening of shoulders, as if the light is pressing gently against the weight they carry. The lamp doesn't just illuminate, it attunes itself to those who pause beneath it. Mrs. Callahan passed on a winter dawn, still holding his photograph, her eyes fixed on the lamp's glow. The paramedics found her curled in the rocking chair, breath frozen in the air like tiny pearls. The lamp flared then, not with electricity, but with a pulse of gold that woke the entire street. Cats jumped from windowsills. Porch lights flickered on as if startled awake. By sunrise, the light had settled back to its butter-yellow hum, but the iron post was warm to the touch. Neighbors whispered about it for weeks. Some said they saw her silhouette in the glow for days after. Others claimed the light dimmed only once. At exactly 3 a.m., the hour she'd always check the mailbox. It learned to recognize longing. Its glow brightens when a nurse walks home after a double shift at the hospital, exhaustion heavy in her shoulders. For a breath, the light holds her like a remembered hand. Steam rises from the sidewalk where her tears fall, carrying the scent of antiseptic and chamomile tea. It deepens to amber when a teenager texts, "I'm safe," to a parent. The phone screen bright in the warm circle of light. The words glow gold on the screen, and for a moment, the child feels the ghost of a palm smoothing their hair. It shivers when an old man pauses beneath it, whispering his wife's name to the dark. Frost blooms on the iron post in shapes like cursive script. He closes his eyes. The cold metal warms beneath his palm. A scent of pipe tobacco lingers in the air long after he's gone. The lamp doesn't just light the path. It knows it. Cracks in the sidewalk glow like rivers of honey. Fallen leaves become stained glass windows under its beam. On bitter nights, the light thickens into a tangible warmth, a blanket against the wind. Children feel it first. They skip through its circle, giggling as their shadows stretch tall and short, tall and short. Dogs pause beneath it, noses lifted, tails wagging at scents only they can smell. Mail carriers linger an extra second. Delivery drivers slow their vans. Even the stray cat that haunts Cedar Street curls up on the warm patch of concrete beneath it on cold mornings. The town planner wanted to replace it with an LED. Councilman Briggs called it a safety hazard during last winter's budget meeting, citing outdated wiring and inconsistent output. He'd sent crews twice to remove it. The first night, their truck stalled 3 blocks away, engine coughing like a dying bird. Tools slipped from numb fingers. Flashlights flickered out, as if the darkness itself resisted. The second night, the new LED bulb shattered in the foreman's hand before he could screw it in. Shards glittered like ice on the sidewalk, sharp and cold. The night crew refused to try again, muttering about bad omens. Mr. Finch, who'd fixed streetlights for 30 years, wiped grease from his brow and said quietly, "That light's got a heartbeat. You don't rip out a heart." Briggs backed down after finding a jar of Mrs. Callahan's famous cinnamon roll glaze on his office chair. The note read, "Some lights guide more than feet." He never mentioned the lamp again. In fact, he started taking evening walks past Cedar and Rowan, always slowing as he passed beneath its glow. Last spring, A sailor in dress white stood beneath it, suitcase at his feet. He had silver hair at the temples now. His hands bore scars from a boiler explosion off Guam. He'd finally retired, tracing the bus route from the Naval Hospital to this corner on a crumpled map. His suitcase sat at his feet, heavy with medals and unanswered letters. The lamp flared, not a flicker, but a sudden, blinding warmth that turned the sidewalk to molten gold. Curtains twitched in every house on Cedar Street. Tears glistened on faces pressed to glass as the glow pooled around the sailor's boots, turning raindrops to liquid topaz. He didn't move. He just stared at the light, remembering his mother's hands tucking his scarf tighter the day he left, the smell of her lavender soap, the way she'd hum, "You Are My Sunshine," off-key while packing his duffel. The light softened. A shape formed in the beam. Not a ghost, but an impression. A woman in a floral apron, rocking gently, her silver hair catching the amber beams. She held out a hand, not to touch him, but to hold him. The sailor sank to his knees, overcome by 20 years of silence. The suitcase tipped over, spilling photos. Him as a boy fishing off the pier, building a lopsided snowman, graduating high school. The light pooled around them, warming the edges of the images until they seemed to breathe. "You came." The light seemed to sigh. "I saved your room. The quilt's still on the bed." He pressed his forehead to the lamppost. Cold iron warmed beneath his touch like living skin. He wept for the letters he'd written but never mailed after hearing his mother had passed. The light deepened around him, a tangible warmth like a blanket drawn close. When he finally stood, the suitcase was upright again. On its handle lay a single magnolia petal, impossibly fresh despite the late hour. The lamp's rhythm changed after that night. On the sailor's first morning back, he swept the porch with his mother's old broom, the bristles whispering against worn wood. The lamp glowed softly at dawn, a butter-yellow pulse sinking with his strokes, as if keeping time with his healing. By noon, neighbors appeared with covered dishes, dumplings wrapped in cloth, apple pie still warm, pot roast in chipped casserole dishes. He set them on the porch swing without a word. That night, he sat where his mother had for 20 years, sipping tea from her chipped mug. The lamp's light wrapped around him like a shawl, steady and sure. Others feel its pull. A runaway teen stumbles beneath it at 3 a.m., shivering in a thin jacket, her breath fogging in the cold. The light deepens to amber, thick and kind. She feels a presence, not a hand, but a knowing, and dials a number she hasn't called in years. When she leaves, a folded 20 rests in her palm, crisp and warm as if just placed there. An old woman pauses beneath the glow after her husband's funeral, her black coat too heavy for her frame. The beam wraps her like a shawl. In its warmth, she smells pipe tobacco and hears the ghost of a chuckle that used to fill their kitchen. She smiles through tears. Snowdrops push through frozen soil at her feet, white stars blooming in winter's grip. The lamp doesn't erase time. It turns waiting into witness. It says, "Your love is a light that outlives distance. Even when footsteps fade, someone is still watching for you." Now, when fog rolls in from the river, the lamp's glow becomes a beacon, not for ships lost at sea, but for souls finding their way back to themselves. A nurse walks home after losing a patient. The light brightens beneath her feet, and for a breath, she feels her little brother's hand in hers, the one she lost to leukemia at 16. A teenager texts, "I'm safe," after a first date. The glow deepens to gold, and the words on the screen hum with warmth. An old man whispers his wife's name. Frost blooms on the iron post in shapes like cursive script, and the scent of her rose perfume lingers in the air long after he's gone. People say time heals all wounds, but perhaps that's not quite right. Time doesn't heal, it holds. It cradles our waiting like a teacup warming cold hands. It holds our footsteps in the sidewalk's cracks. It holds our unsent letters in lamplight, waiting for us to be ready to read them again. This lamp knows that better than anyone. It does not rush. It does not forget. It simply holds the space where absence becomes light. And if you ever walk past Cedar and Rowan on a foggy night, and feel the pavement warm beneath your feet, don't hurry on. Stop, breathe. Let the butter yellow glow cool around you like spilled honey. You might just feel a hand on your shoulder, light as moth wings, whispering, "You are seen. You are remembered. Someone is still waiting for you." For longing, when it is born of light, does not fade. It becomes glow. It becomes warmth. It becomes the beam that parts the dark long after the watcher is gone. And so the lamp burns, not for streets, but for souls, not for night, but for the space between heartbeats where home lives, not for endings, but for the first footstep on the path back, because everyone, at some point, needs to know your love is a lantern no distance can extinguish. On the stillest of nights, when the road feels endless and your footsteps echo like unanswered prayers, the lamp opens its glow, just enough to whisper, "I remember you. I have always remembered you. Keep walking." The fire burns low, but it does not go out. No matter how dark the night, a light waits for you here.